Two KGB double agents vanish into Moscow and never come back. The FBI panics, a mole hunt begins, and the man handpicked to help catch the traitor turns out to be the traitor himself. If you love true crime, Cold War espionage, and spy stories that feel like a thriller but are all too real, hit subscribe, tap like, and drop Foxstone Park in the comments so I know you're locked in. Today, we're walking through the rise and fall of Robert Hanssen, how a devout family man in suburban Virginia sold out America's deepest secrets for decades, used dead drops in a quiet park, and sent brave allies to their deaths. In 1986, alarms were blaring inside the FBI. Two critical Soviet assets, KGB officers Valery Martynov and Sergei Motorin, were suddenly compromised. Both had been lured back to Moscow and executed. Someone inside was giving the Soviets exactly what they needed. So the Bureau turned to the place that should have been best equipped to help, its Soviet Analytical Unit, built to track KGB and GRU activity and decode the relentless chess match of the Cold War. The supervisor was a 44-year-old named Robert Hanssen. He was assigned to catch the mole. What no one knew then was that the mole they were hunting was Hanssen himself. If you imagine glamorous meets gritty, that was Hanssen's espionage routine. He would leave his house in Vienna, Virginia, quiet cul-de-sac, family life, church on Sundays, and drive a few minutes to Foxstone Park. He'd walk to a small footbridge and tuck a plastic trash bag filled with top-secret documents or floppy disks in a hidden spot. On his way out, he'd place a strip of tape vertically on a signpost, his signal to a passing KGB handler that the dead drop was live. After collecting the files, the Russian would leave money and mark the same post with a horizontal strip of tape to confirm the exchange. It was classic spycraft, built on signals, trust, and silence. For 22 years, Hanssen spied for the Soviet Union and, after it collapsed, for Russia. He delivered more than 6,000 pages of classified material, exposed some of the FBI and CIA's greatest secrets, and identified Soviet officers who had risked everything to work for America. Some of those men died because of him. For this, he received cash and diamonds worth about $600,000, hardly a fortune for the scale of the betrayal. When he was arrested, his 88-year-old mother said he had a happy childhood. The truth was far darker. Hanssen's father was a Chicago cop, old school, physically and emotionally abusive. He would roll his son up inside a carpet or a stiff mattress, pinning his arms, spinning him until he threw up. He claimed it would toughen the boy. As a teenager, Robert went to take his driving test, not knowing his father had secretly arranged for him to fail. Even on his wedding day, Hanssen's father told his bride, Bonnie, she was marrying a loser. Those kinds of wounds don't heal cleanly. They scar your view of the world and of yourself. Robert studied accounting, earned an MBA from Northwestern, and, maybe inevitably, followed his father into law enforcement. In 1972, he joined the Chicago Police Department and worked in a unit investigating police corruption. It was his first taste of intelligence work. 3 years later, in January 1976, he had his eye on a bigger stage and took the oath as a special agent of the FBI. He wasn't a street agent chasing bank robbers. He worked a mix of white-collar crime and accounting assignments inside the Bureau's criminal division in New York. In March 1979, he got what he'd wanted all along, counterintelligence. He began building national databases to track Soviet operatives and compiled profiles on KGB and GRU spies. He knew the enemy. He wrote the playbook. Then he crossed the line. No one recruited him. He walked into the Manhattan office of Armtorg, a Soviet commercial agency that doubled as a GRU front, and offered himself up. Early on, he handed over the identity of the most valuable American asset in the GRU, TOPHAT, the code name for Dmitri Polyakov. For 17 years, Polyakov fed the United States priceless intelligence on Soviet strategy, strategic missiles, and nuclear doctrine, reports that shaped national security decisions at the highest level. The GRU didn't act on Hanssen's tip immediately. It wasn't until 1985, when CIA mole Aldrich Ames also exposed Polyakov, that the Soviets finally arrested him. But the damage Hanssen had set in motion was already rippling across the Cold War battlefield. By 1981, Hanssen had moved to FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C., to the budget unit of the Intelligence Division. This posted him at the center of the web. He saw how resources were allocated, what operations were hot, and where surveillance dollars went. He helped develop tools for tracking Soviet diplomats and even became an expert on polygraphs. He used that expertise to argue against expanding their use, an argument that, in hindsight, gave him cover. He was respected for his computer skills, not his charisma. Co-workers later described him as a man who lived in the shadows, the last guy you'd invite for a drink. 2 years later, in 1983, he moved to the Bureau's Soviet Analytical Unit as a supervisory special agent, studying KGB and GRU operations inside the United States. Around this time, the FBI and CIA scored 2 massive counterintelligence victories. Valery Martynov, a KGB officer assigned to the Soviet embassy in Washington, agreed to work for the United States. He wasn't just motivated by money. He believed in the work and the possibility that America didn't have to be the enemy. Then came Sergei Motorin, another KGB officer who was nudged into cooperation after the agencies exploited his personal vulnerabilities. Motorin delivered gold, a full roster of KGB personnel in the embassy. The Bureau assigned code names to protect them. It didn't matter. Hanssen had access to their debriefs, learned their identities, and told Moscow. He also fingered another KGB officer turned American asset, Boris Yuzin. The KGB already had suspicions after a janitor at the San Francisco consulate found a spy camera disguised as a cigarette lighter. Yuzin was a smoker. The coincidence wasn't kind. In 1985, Hanssen wrote a letter to the KGB's chief of counterintelligence at the Soviet embassy. He addressed it, "Dear Mr. Cherkashin," and offered to send a box of highly compartmented intelligence. He warned that Yuzin, Motorin, and Martynov were working for America. He asked for $100,000. What he didn't know was that Aldrich Ames had burned those same men 4 months earlier. Still, Hanssen's letter was devastating as a second confirmation. Motorin and Martynov were executed. Yuzin got a labor camp. Hanssen thrived on rules and rituals. He laid out precise instructions for how he wanted to be paid and how communications should work. He set dead drops in parks and used tape on signposts as signals. The contradiction at the heart of his life is hard to overstate. By day, he worked to defend the country from Soviet espionage, even creating software to track the movements of Soviet diplomats. By night, he fed the Russians exactly the secrets he'd been hired to protect. He was a devout Catholic who attended Mass daily and took his family, Bonnie and their 6 children, to church on Sundays. He reportedly confessed his espionage to a priest, trusting the sanctity of the confessional would keep him safe. And still, he kept going. In 1988, he turned over more than 500 pages of documents, including an internal study on Soviet penetrations of the FBI, an inquiry he personally oversaw. He revealed the identities of Soviet officers the Bureau had tried to recruit. He answered Moscow's questions about what the United States knew of Soviet missile capabilities with meticulous assessments. Then came his most infamous betrayal. In September 1989, he exposed a joint FBI-NSA operation that had dug a tunnel under the new Soviet embassy in Washington, D.C. The Bureau had purchased a nearby townhouse to hide the entrance and poured hundreds of millions of dollars into the project. The tunnel would have given the U.S. a priceless listening post into Soviet communications. Hanssen made sure it never worked. As one author noted, there's a grim irony in a spy tunnel being betrayed by a mole. The KGB never knew his name. He never revealed it. But they flattered him in their letters, sensing that ego was part of his fuel. They praised his humor and his sharp-as-a-razor mind. For a while, the relationship seemed unbreakable. Then the world shifted. In 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed. Hanssen stepped back from his handlers. The turmoil overseas mirrored the cracks forming in his own behavior. By 1993, his temper was spilling into the open. He grabbed a subordinate, Kimberly Lichtenberg, by the arm, dragging her from a meeting and yelling at her for leaving early. She was seriously injured. He got a 5-day suspension. Around the same time, he approached a GRU officer in the garage of his apartment building with information about American double agents. The Russians suspected a trap and reported the incident to the State Department. To many in the Bureau, Hanssen was odd, abrasive, even unstable, but not a mole. That would change. In 1994, the CIA arrested Aldrich Ames. It was a quake through the intelligence world, but the damages Ames explained didn't cover everything. Too many operations had gone sideways. Too many assets were lost. The FBI and CIA agreed another mole had to exist. The case of Felix Bloch, a State Department official suspected of selling secrets to the Soviets, added fuel. In 1989, Hanssen had tipped off the KGB that Bloch was under surveillance. A KGB officer who'd been meeting with Bloch broke off contact and delivered a chilling line in a call the FBI recorded, "A contagious disease is suspected." Since Ames had no access to that investigation, the warning had to have come from someone inside the FBI. The hunt dragged on. The Bureau arrested FBI agent Earl Edwin Pitts for spying for the Russians, but some inside remained convinced there was still someone else. Special Agent Thomas Kimmel pointed out that the Russians hadn't asked Pitts for some of the most damaging information, like the tunnel under their embassy. He wasn't their man. Investigators tried to pry open ex-KGB officers, now SVR, who had worked in the U.S. during the worst years. They offered up to $1 million for leads. Nothing stuck. They even zeroed in on a CIA officer, Brian Kelly, and put him through 2 years of hell with capital charges hovering over him before admitting they were wrong. The breakthrough finally came in 2000. The FBI targeted a retired KGB officer who had worked in Washington and was now in business in Moscow. To draw him out, they teamed up with an American corporation and lured him to New York for a meeting. In a conference room far from Red Square, the KGB veteran admitted he had kept a copy of a mole file as personal insurance when he left the service. The FBI agreed to pay him $7 million. The file didn't include the mole's name because Hanssen had never disclosed it. But it didn't need to. The file contained a recorded conversation between a KGB officer and the mole. FBI counterintelligence agent Michael Wagaspak listened, recognized the voice, and couldn't place it. Another clue in the file referenced a quote attributed to General George Patton, the purple-pissing Japanese, a phrase you don't hear every day. Analyst Bob King, who'd worked with Hanssen, remembered him using that bizarre wording. "I think that is Bob Hanssen," he said. Wagaspak listened again. "My God," he said, "that's him." The final nail was a black plastic trash bag from a dead drop. Hanssen's fingerprints were on the inner layer. It was overwhelming. Now they had to catch him in the act. The trap was careful and elegant. The Bureau offered Hanssen a shiny promotion into the senior executive service. More money, prestige, an office on the 9th floor of FBI headquarters. Hidden cameras and microphones were embedded before he moved in. His phones at work and home were tapped. The FBI even bought the house across the street from his place in Vienna to watch his comings and goings. They assigned him an assistant, Eric O'Neill, whose real job was to study everything Hanssen did. Within weeks, more than 300 agents were tracking him day and night. When investigators quietly searched his car, they found thumbtacks and chalk in the glove compartment, likely signaling tools for coordinating with handlers. Hanssen started to feel the heat. His new gig wasn't yielding meaningful work. He couldn't access top-secret systems anymore. His paranoia ticked up, and he sent a letter to the SVR under one of his aliases, Ramon Garcia, saying he was lying low. He claimed he'd detected strange radio bursts from his car and wrote, "Something has aroused the sleeping tiger." He promised to be in touch next year at the same time and place. That place was Foxstone Park. The FBI learned he planned to make a drop there on February 18, 2001, based on a letter he'd sent the year before, scheduling the exchange like an annual chore. He arrived at 4:34 p.m., tucked the package by the footbridge, and headed back to his car. Agents moved in fast, some with long guns. Case agent Doug Gregory spoke for the roomful of betrayed colleagues. "Bob, this is a sad day for all of us." Hanssen shrugged. "Life has its ups and downs." On July 6, 2001, he pleaded guilty to 15 counts of espionage. In court, he read a short statement, "I apologize for my behavior. I am shamed by it. I have opened the door for calumny against my totally innocent wife and children. I have hurt so many deeply." The harm wasn't just to the country. He had promised Bonnie he would stop after she caught him once. He didn't. According to author David Wise, he encouraged his best friend, retired Army officer Jack Hoshauer, to secretly watch him and Bonnie during intimacy without her knowledge. Wise also reported that Hanssen even discussed drugging her so his friend could father a child with her. When Bonnie learned the truth, she told her sister, "My husband is a traitor and a pervert." Hanssen spent the rest of his life at ADX Florence, the Supermax prison in Colorado, with no chance of parole. On June 5, 2023, he was found dead in his cell at the age of 79. The cause was colon cancer. He took to the grave some reasons only he could fully explain. But the question still hangs. Why did he do it? Money was part of it, but not the whole picture. In a letter to the KGB, Hanssen wrote that he had little use for more than $100,000, a telling admission considering the scale of his crimes. Psychiatrist Dr. David Charney, who consulted for the defense, argued that Hanssen wanted to prove his worth at home, to feel like less of a failure in his marriage, and that old injuries from his father's abuse festered into something darker. Hanssen described his rage as a cork popping out of a bottle whenever he spied. Pride, humiliation, and anger tied themselves into a knot he cut by betraying the very people who trusted him. In the end, Hanssen's story is a spy thriller that actually happened. It's a cautionary tale about national security, about how one man's contradictions can rip holes in the fabric of an entire intelligence community, and about the quiet suburban spaces, like a bridge in Foxstone Park, where history changes with a strip of tape. If you want more deep dives into famous moles, double agents, and Cold War operations, Aldrich Ames, the GRU, the tunnel under the embassy, and the hunt that saved future assets, make sure you subscribe, hit the bell, and tell me in the comments which moment shocked you most. I'm reading everything, and the next story starts where you tell me to go.